Let's say that there is a mother who's pregnant, and let's say that there's a 90% chance that she dies during childbirth, but there's a 100% chance that the baby will live every single time. Do you think that the mother should always be forced to give birth, even knowing that she's going to die 9 times out of 10?
My name's Saanvi. You can follow me on TikTok at saanvi.reasoning, and I am pro-life, and I would call myself a capitalist. Yeah. So I should just go into my opening now.
Yeah, go for it. And then I'm Destiny, blah, blah, blah. And then, yeah, what's your, go for it. Give us your opening statement for pro-life, yeah. Or anti-abortion.
For sure. So the reason that I am pro-life is because I hold that all people belong to a human substance. This is their substance form. So a defining characteristic of this form is the potency to attain values and act towards virtues. In order to do these necessary conditions, people need to be able to actualize their values and sustain their lives, which kind of leads to the proper form of government, which would be to protect life and liberties. I believe that people ought to have the ability to live and the ability to act unimpeded to sustain their own lives. Yeah, so you can go ahead.
Okay. So I believe that we grant things moral consideration when they have consciousness. It seems to be intuitively correct. We stop valuing things when they lose consciousness. We value things when they have consciousness. And trying to value it at any particular point in like the development of a human seems arbitrary to me. So I tend to reject those definitions. And I imagine that's probably what we'll argue about in here. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess this kind of leads to like my reductio. So if a baby was born, let's say, into sleep, but had all the properties of first trimester baby, which I can in your sense would not, have consciousness. I would argue that they don't have it in the womb at all, but kind of non-essential. By your standard, would not have consciousness until after they are born for 5 months. Do you think that it would be okay to kill a newborn baby?
Okay, so on optics, I reject some of the terminology here because the newborn baby that you're describing or the type of thing born here would be alien to any other type of newborn baby that's ever been described. If there was something that could be birthed out of a person that resembled a person but for some reason didn't have any type of conscious formation or conscious experience yet, I would say that, yeah, you can have an abortion of that thing up until it begins to form some sort of conscious experience. And then further, I would hold that I think that's relatively consistent with how we define things. If you give birth to something and that thing is brain dead, if it looks like it's never going to have a conscious experience, it seems like you would abort it, or if it's not currently having one, there's no reason to believe it'll have one, you would probably abort it. Although for emotional reasons, people get weird once it comes out of the body, of course, but yeah.
Yeah. I agree with you that if something is brain dead and is not going to actually, actualize its potential, under my framework, I would obviously not grant it moral consideration either. So yeah, I guess that kind of gets into the principle of actualization. So why don't you think that we should value potentiality?
I don't understand how any type of moral system could value something that doesn't currently exist. The idea of valuing or taking into consideration the preferences of a thing that has no preferences or can assert any preferences just seems like it opens up a whole can of worms to me. So it seems as though it's far easier and more reasonable to just say that once you have a conscious and once you can assert preferences, it's easier there to be respectful or mindful of those preferences, and then any type of ethical or government system ought to respect and protect those preferences. But you can't protect something that doesn't exist yet, or there's not a harm being committed there if something doesn't exist yet.
Okay, what do you mean by it doesn't exist?
So, like, for instance, if I were to throw a baseball through the air, it's fine if there's going to be a window there in a year. It's not like I'm pre-breaking a window, or if I prevent a window from being born, it's not the same as breaking a window. The idea that preventing the formation of a conscious experience is the same as ending one I recognize that there would be a distinction between those two things. I don't think it's one and the same. I don't understand what it means to respect the potentiality of life. I don't know why that potential matters. What matters is whether or not a preference asserting thing exists yet, and then if it doesn't, then it doesn't.
So the reason that I would say it matters is because in accordance with like the categorization of human substance, the fetus would still have potency and like the ability to actualize. So like somebody under general anesthesia, for example, although they may not be actualizing at T0, right? They might not be actualizing. We still value their potentiality because we know that they're going to be able to do so in X amount of time. So then that's where I just think when you mention moral baggage and what feels, intuitively wrong, even though I do believe that there are objective morals, I think that you can agree, it would be intuitively wrong to kill somebody that's under general anesthesia just because they're not actualizing or acting, as you would say, consciously at the moment.
While that's true, the only reason why it would be bad is because we imagine that they would have asserted a preference while being conscious that they don't want to be killed. So somebody undergoing anesthesia is likely to have been alive before undergoing anesthesia, and in that living conscious form, it didn't want to be killed, so you wouldn't kill it while it's temporarily unconscious.
Well, sure. I have a thing to this because normally when you're put under general anesthesia, you actually, consent to doing so. But let's say you're in a car accident, for example, and you have no friends or family. People are going to put you under general anesthesia if they need to, because we err on the side of life. So in that instance, like if you were in a car accident and you're put under general anesthesia, do you think it would be more, and you can even have suicidal tendencies, let's say, right? Like you were trying to kill yourself, or, you want to die. But given that the doctors don't know this at the time, would you say it would be morally permissible in order to kill them?
If the doctors don't know, your job as a doctor is to keep somebody alive. If somebody's going to the hospital, the assumption is going to be that this is a person that wants to be living. They were in a prior conscious state, and they were living in that state, so you would assume so. If you were given indication otherwise, then it would be a different story. But no, you'd make the assumption that they want to continue. And then once they are alive, they want to kill themselves, they can do that, I guess.
Yeah, I would agree that once they're alive and rational enough to make that decision, they'd be able to. But why would past sentient or consciousness even matter when talking about like the moral consideration we would give someone?
Because there's nothing to consider before a conscious experience has emerged. If a past conscious experience emerged, then that past conscious thing is asserted that it wants to be treated as a living thing, as most people do. I'm ignoring edge cases where something might be suicidal or something like that, but most people that are alive have preferences that need to be fulfilled. They usually want like food, shelter, whatever. Once that thing has come into existence, that's a right that we can recognize. If it hasn't come into existence yet, there is nothing to recognize.
Well, yeah, right. I would just say existence I would say like a fetus or even a zygote would still exist, because we can imagine that too for a fetus, right? Like most people don't want to be killed. Most people don't want their baby to be killed. But even so, you're saying because the baby can't think for itself, I want to die, therefore we should have the ability to make that decision for it.
Yeah, so typically, when I speak in terms of preferences, and when most people speak in terms of preferences, I don't know if we would say that like a fetus wants to live, like a tree wants to live. I think that usually these are just things that do. They have some developmental process. It's not until some conscious experience emerges that there becomes some preference or desire that we begin to respect or reciprocate as like being like a conscious living thing.
Okay. Yeah. So I don't see why not. We can't make the assumption you mentioned before for the fetus, like with the person in the car accident, because we can rationally assume that the fetus would want to live as well. But
we never would do that in any other circumstance. We assume that there needs to be some base level brain functioning in order to do that. So for instance, if somebody is brain dead in a hospital bed and we don't think that they're ever coming back, we would never make assumptions. Even if the rest of the body was healthy, we wouldn't make the assumption, well, they probably want to live. We'd say, well, the brain has ceased to function. There's no more conscious experience.
I agree with you here. I agree with you, because, they wouldn't have the ability to actualize their potential. They're brain dead, so therefore we wouldn't grant them moral consideration. Done. But in this case, the active potentiality would make all the difference. The reason why we err on the side of life in instances like the car accident mentioned, because we can rationally assume they would want to live. And even by going off the principle of rationality, newborns can't really make that decision for themselves. You could argue they have a conscious, right? But that kind of would be special pleading from the rationality principle. So
why would we assume, or why should we value the potentiality of life?
Well, like I said before, like it would kind of have to be grounded in my ethics with the ability to act, without being impeded. So yeah. So my main issue with why I describe myself as like ethically, I think 55% pro-choice and then legally 100% is because I agree with you that there can be a grounding here, but this grounding is going to happen on a level that is wholly unprovable. So for instance, earlier when you talked about like people belonging to a human substance, what is the human substance, right? That is the question. I clarified after that. I said the human substance or the substance form is the defining characteristic would be the potency, to attain values and act towards virtues. But now going back to what I said before, I need to know, is this standard rationality or is this standard consciousness? Because in like the car accident example, I think, the standard would be rationality. Is the person rationally enough to make that decision to be able to kill themselves? Or, while a fetus obviously is not, neither is a newborn, or is the standard consciousness, because a person under general anesthesia is obviously not conscious. but we err on the side of life.
Yeah, so I have no attachment to the whatever rationality, whatever we're using here. It's not what I'm looking at. I'm looking for a conscious experience that's like ours. So anything that has begun a conscious experience like ours ought to be valued as a conscious experience that ought to be protected, recognizing that there might be some temporary lapses in consciousness, whether we're talking about sleep or anesthesia, doesn't mean that all of a sudden it negates the prior assertions that they had wanting to continue to exist. However, when we speak of a fetus, there are no prior assertions of which to reference. There has been no conscious experience yet, only one that might occur down the line, but we can't value that conscious experience that hasn't even begun to assert itself yet. There's nothing there yet to protect.
So again, going back to the car accident example, using this conscious experience, we can 100% within ethicality kill that person that's under general anesthesia. Maybe
because they've had a prior conscious experience.
And why should I value that?
Because once something has existed and asserts a preference, I think that preference ought to be respected, even if that person is temporarily unconscious.
Wait. First, I kind of am confused here, because if we go back to preferences, then it could just be like somebody doesn't have the preference to live. If somebody crashed their car on purpose and had, I want to die, people will still put them under general anesthesia and, try to bring them back to life. Why is that?
No, that's actually the opposite. We would respect their right to die if they followed the correct procedures. So we have things in the United States called DNRs, do not resuscitate. If somebody had a do not resuscitate on them and for whatever reason found themselves in the hospital, then we wouldn't. You would allow them to die because they would have asserted the preference that they wanted to die.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm familiar with do not resuscitates, but like in car accident examples, like if they don't know that that's going to be the exact point where they die and they happen to, we ought to, respect that their wishes to die, even though we're not sure, although we could have a clue.
I mean, if you don't know, then you tend to err on the side that I don't know what err on the side of life means. So you err on the side of if something currently exists, it probably wants to continue existing, and if they're taking the steps to continue to exist, they probably want to. So you would respect that preference. You make the assumption, they're unconscious right now, but I'm going to assume that they probably want to wake up and be alive afterwards. Yeah.
So why are we valuing that potentiality? It's because we know these characteristics are part of the human substance, which would also be what the fetus is a part of.
So I'm not valuing the potentiality. I'm valuing what already existed. They already asserted that they are
you are valuing potentiality indirectly, because if a person was brain dead, right, they're not coming back. Mm-hmm. Given that person's in a coma, even though you say they had past experience, you are valuing the potentiality, that they are going to come out of the coma. Because if they're brain dead, obviously you don't care.
Yeah, well, when you say value the potentiality, you're making it sound like I'm trying to draw my value from the future. I'm not. I'm drawing my value from the past. In the past, they existed. They exert a preference. That's where the value comes from. Now, if they're dead, then they're gone, and that particular thing is no longer considered.
A dead person lived in the past. They exuded their preferences. Now they're dead. Why should I grant them moral consideration?
If they're dead?
Yes.
Well, you don't once they're dead, right?
Yeah, it's almost like we value the future, like potential.
No, there's a difference between do you recognize that there's a difference between I am a thing and I've asserted a preference, then I go to sleep and then I wake up, versus there's a thing that doesn't even exist yet and then it might become conscious in the future. Those are two different types of, you use potentiality to try to draw an equivocation between the two, but the potential for something to exist and assert its very first preference is different than something that has asserted a preference and then is undergoing a temporary alleviation of consciousness and then will come back and will hopefully still have those preferences. These are two different things. You can call them both potential if you want, but they're two different types of potentials.
Wait, could you repeat that last part? Cut out.
These are two fundamentally different types of potentials you're talking about. Yours is the potential for something to even exist. It hasn't even existed yet. Mine is it asserts a preference. It is gone for a little bit, whether through sleep or anesthesia, and then it comes back and it probably wants to maintain the preferences that it already asserted. But the value that it's getting is drawn from the already assertedness, or the preferences that it's already asserted while already conscious. They're not something that yeah.
Okay, wait, yeah. Okay, I see what you're saying. But when we're talking about going back to the very first analogy I made, it kind of relates to this, because when we're talking about a newborn that's born into, anesthesia, or born even into a coma or asleep, just because they haven't had a previous conscious experience, right? And they're a living, I know you didn't want to call it a baby, a thing, would you not say they're in a state of existence?
I mean, something exists, but if it's hard to conceive of something that is born that hasn't had a conscious experience yet. It sounds like there is some massive developmental delay or brain function error, if that is the case. It's just hard to imagine that.
That's the whole thing with time preference. Let's say for the sake of the hypothetical, they had the same development as a baby in the first trimester, but given 3 months outside of the womb in an incubator, they would immediately have the rationality or consciousness of what you would consider a third baby, a third trimester baby.
Yeah, then until it has that first conscious experience, then I would get no moral consideration. Of course not. Whatever
Right,
thing
so-
exists
so-
prior to that, yeah.
So by like your ethical framework, we would be able to literally brutally dismember this thing that is going to be healthy in 3 months. And that is outside of the mother.
Well, so these are all really loaded words. So when we say brutally, you're implying an experience, and I like that you use the word brutally because you're borrowing. Well, real quick, hold on, because you're borrowing from my definition. So when you use the term brutal, the idea behind that is to invoke some form of suffering. But in order for that form of suffering to exist, there needs to be a conscious experience that's already happening. When you cut your hair, when you cut your hair, when you clip your fingernails, you do things like that. We would never call that brutal because those things aren't having an experience. So when you talk about brutally dismembering something that's not having a conscious experience, what I have to do is I have to point to the fact that what you are asserting is actually impossible. You can't do anything brutal to something that isn't having that experience because no suffering is being experienced because the consciousness is not there yet.
I would just call that a non-essential. Like, we can have a dead person, you can, cut off every single piece of their body, and we don't grant them any moral consideration, but I would still consider that a brutal act. So if we're going off,
we don't. Wait, do you think it's brutal?
Yeah, I would say, hold on, yes, I would say it's a brutal thing to rape a dead person. Yes.
Do you think it's brutal to set a person? Yes. Do you think it's brutal to set a human being on fire?
Yes.
Do you think it's brutal to cremate a corpse?
No.
Okay, so there's the difference, right? There's a suffering that's experienced there, right?
Well, there's a difference between the principles, right? Like, I would say, if it has no moral consideration, but that doesn't mean that, we honor the family's wishes, as in like with the coma, or we honor their own wishes. Now, unless their wish was to be raped, I would say, no, that would be a brutal thing to do.
Okay, I mean, we could say it, but it doesn't.
Even so, without this like brutal thing, right? Like, a baby is born, whatever you want to call it, a thing, and after 5 months, it's going to experience what a general newborn would. And I don't think that you can hold with the whole brutal thing is kind of going off on a team that you can literally do anything you want to this thing, literally, right? Like you said, brutal may not be the right word, but you can cut off all this thing. You can do whatever you want. You could rape it.
I mean, that would be like really, really, really weird.
Given that it would hold zero moral consideration, all of this should be ethically permissible.
I mean, it would be, yeah. But I mean, like, we already engage in acts of what we would call barbarism, I guess, if we were using these same standards, right? Like, any type of stem cell research or embryonic stem cell research would follow under these exact same things. We have a potentiality for life if you would have given it another environment or whatever. I mean, I'm only taking issue because, like, the picture you're drawing is like raping a sleeping baby, which is obviously extreme. But the creature, whatever you're describing being born, is far outside of, like, the standard human development. Babies aren't born and then given a conscious experience 5 months after birth. If we want to like theorize some hypothetical creature that does that, we can. But then when you start applying like real life, like you want to murder it or dismember, it's like, I mean, like, we murder and dismember like non-living things all the time, and whatever you're describing is so far removed from what normal babies start to have a conscious experience like in the womb in the second trimester. So the idea that something would be born and not have one for 5 months, I mean, yeah, I guess under my ethical system you could do whatever you want to it, but like that's just so far removed from what like a normal birth would be.
Right. But I mean, it kind of raises the question, like, why you shouldn't value potentiality, because this thing is going to be perfectly normal and a perfectly what you would even call a baby rather than a thing in 5 months. So it would be almost counterintuitive to be able to do anything you want to, or even forget 5 months. Let's say like 5 seconds.
I just have no reason. There's no reason to value the potentiality. Why would you value something that doesn't exist yet?
Wait. So at T0, at the very moment, right? This thing does not have what you would consider a conscience, right? At the very moment. Now, 5 seconds later, we know it will. Can we still kill it?
Prior to the formation of that conscious experience? Yeah, sure.
Let's say prior to the formation of the initial conscious experience.
Sure.
So, wait, hold on. So I don't think you actually care about a conscious experience if you don't allow it to actually develop.
I mean, the fetus to me is the same moral equivalence as like any particular, like an ovary or an ovum or an egg or like a sperm. Like, it's just like there are things that exist. Like, I don't.
Okay, with the sperm thing. Okay, I hear that a lot. Obviously, like, why do you grant a zygote moral consideration but not a sperm? It would obviously just be because, like, we say a zygote would have active potential while a sperm is just passive.
I mean, zygotes don't have active potential though. They still need to be combined with a host for at least like 3 to 4 months, I think, right, before you can have.
Wait, why should being combined to a host not have anything to do with active potential?
What do you consider active potential? What does that mean?
Well, I mean, yeah, from the very beginning, just like the active potential to like ability to act on their life unimpeded.
What does that? Wait, what does that mean? Can you define that more for me?
Yeah, so I'll just give an example. But like, let's say when you have active potential, you have a gun and you're putting it to someone's head. You have the active potential to kill them. Now, everybody has the potential to kill someone. Am I right? We're not going to go around arresting random people on the street just because they have passively, and it's an epistemic possibility that they could possibly kill someone. We're only going to arrest someone when they actualize this potential. Maybe get a gun illegally, put it to someone's head. They're committing an act of initiation of force and impending someone's life. So that's what kind of the distinction there between like a sperm and a zygote.
Wait, but a zygote doesn't have any active potential. What do you mean?
Yeah, it would, because from the moment of conception, it would be moving towards actualizing its substance.
It doesn't have any potential yet. It might in like 3 years or whatever. But like, what potential? What action potential does a zygote have? What choice does it make? What do you mean?
Wait, what? It wouldn't have to make a choice. The natural causal chain from the moment of conception is to be what you would consider even a person.
I don't know what you mean. I guess I don't know what you mean by active potential. Because when you said active potential before, you made it sound like something is a moral agent that can choose one thing or another. Zygotes don't make choices, right?
Well, I mean, just because someone sits on their couch and like eats chips all day and doesn't go to work, obviously they still have like the active potentiality for life, but they may not have the active potentiality to like attain their virtues, if that's what you were going off of. But just because an environment enables active potentiality doesn't mean it doesn't have active potentiality. Like you said, the mother being the fetus being connected to the like host for 3 to 4 months or whatever.
So what do you mean when you say a zygote has active potentiality again?
Like it's going to become a rational being that can act towards virtues. I think that's the best way to put it simply.
Wait, so what's the difference? Okay, wait. So when I ask you why should I value the like potential life or value something that doesn't exist yet, it feels like you're just telling me what potential life is in another definition. Is there like a reason why you ought to value like?
If you want to call it potential life, I think that's okay, but I would just say it's life in and of itself. So
well, but we're not talking about life. Neither of us care about life. We're talking about like a specific human related thing, right? We're talking about like when something gets like, we could say personhood or something, right?
Yeah.
So what I'm asking is why should I value because I just don't understand why I should value the potentiality of consciousness rather than just consciousness itself.
Well, it's kind of like the moral baggage that would come with doing the opposite, grounded with just the ability for people to be able to do such things in the first place. So if we ask ourselves a question like, why should we even value consciousness later on? And I wouldn't see a reason to even value it at that point. Because the whole thing, like I said with the 5 seconds example, is that we care about, if we move towards what you would even consider as personhood. So that's why it would have intrinsic value to be able to actualize its potential. Like it has goal-directed potency. Like, right?
None of these things.
Hold on.
Yeah, okay.
Wait, hold on, I got it. Everything would be acting towards a goal. So like I mentioned with the person with the gun, that person would be actualizing their potential towards a goal to kill that person. That fetus is actualizing its potential to become a rational being.
That's great, but there's still not a reason why I should value that before it actually hits that point of being able to assert a preference.
Wait, why should I care about asserting a preference? Or wait, am I caring about asserting a preference or just consciousness?
Well, that's what I'm sorry. When the conscious experience forms, you start to assert preferences. But like having a consciousness, why should I care about the potentiality to form a consciousness? Why not just wait till the conscious experience forms and then care about that thing?
Because the reason that we should wait for it is because it's literally a goal. Like it's like asking why we should care if a person gets a gun illegally and like walks up to someone but doesn't exactly shoot them yet, right? Like we care about the thing that's being actualized, the thing that has a goal-directed process, and you're impending on somebody else's goal.
Well, but the reason why we're worried about that happening is because somebody else might end somebody else's conscious experience, right?
I mean, they can be unconscious. Wouldn't really matter.
Well, if they're unconscious, then if you want to go shoot corpses, I mean, you're probably going to get in trouble with the morgue, but it's not murder.
You want to go shoot a person under general anesthesia, they can be unconscious.
Well, but that would be not good as well, because the person probably asserted a preference to live before becoming unconscious, right?
And if they didn't?
If they wanted to die, if they've got like a DNR, we let them die, then that's fine. There's no problem there.
I still don't understand, like this kind of obviously goes back into like general anesthesia. Why should we even err on the side of life when we have this thing that at T0 right now isn't conscious? I know we can make this reasonable prediction, right? But why even make it? At this moment, that thing is not valuable.
At what moment?
T0, like the moment of unconsciousness.
So I feel like, I don't know if we're going to circle this again, but If something is unconscious, but previous to that it was conscious, the assumption is going to be that it wants to continue to be conscious unless it's stated otherwise, because we assume that most conscious things want to remain living unless they've given like a reason not to, right? If it hasn't even had a conscious experience yet, there is nothing of which we can speak to protect in terms of conscious experience. There is no experience there. There is no consciousness there that we can even have a conversation about.
I don't understand why I should care if they made a pretense beforehand still. Who cares what they want?
Well, that's going to come down to your ethical framework. So in my ethical framework, I would say that we ought to... wait, you answered me. You asked me questions. I'll answer, right? So under my ethical framework, I would say the reason why you would care is because if we didn't do that, if we just didn't care what happened to people that were unconscious, then we would walk around just murdering everybody in their sleep. That'd probably not be a good world. So we ought to value the experiences of people that are going under general anesthesia or going into sleep, because when they wake up, they probably want to still living, because if I were to go under general anesthesia or if I were to go to sleep, I don't want to be killed in my sleep. So that's why we ought to value prior conscious experiences.
Well, yeah, again, this doesn't really answer my question, because you said, oh, that wouldn't be good because they have made this previous preference to live. Why should I care about their previous preferences?
I mean, I guess you...
When determining their moral value.
You don't have to, I guess, if you're willing to accept...
I'm sure, you're not bad faith. Under my ethical framework that I'm going to grant it consideration from the...
Okay, so let's real quick. Yeah, I understand. Yeah, so we just basic deduction. We run this down logically. So when you say, why shouldn't I care if unconscious people are murdered indiscriminately? The reason why you probably shouldn't care is because if you're a rational agent and you could follow premise, conclusion, what you're going to realize is if you assert that it's okay to kill somebody that's unconscious, you're probably opening yourself up to being killed when you're unconscious. Or at the very least, you're creating a world where everybody can be killed when they're unconscious, which is probably a world that's going to descend into mayhem. So when you ask me, why should I care about a prior conscious experience? I'll answer, because if you don't, then the world will descend into absurdity and mayhem. That's what I would say.
Okay, wait. Okay, wait. Again, so yeah, okay. Now that kind of gets into like, you're a utilitarian, I presume?
Sure.
Yeah, so if X, would make the world be mayhem, produce less utility, be a worse place, you wouldn't want X to happen.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, and if X were to, produce utility, produce a better world, you would want it to happen, and it would be morally justified?
Yeah.
Okay, so if slavery, I know you've probably heard this, if slavery produced the most utility, and in my thought experiment, it would produce the most utility, would it be morally permissible?
Yeah, I don't believe that's congruent with our real world, though, but...
Okay. So yeah, I mean, like, I don't see why, like, as a utilitarian, you should even care about current consciousness at all. Well,
I mean, I can explain it again for a third time. So as a utilitarian, the reason why I care about conscious experience is because I have a conscious experience and I want that conscious experience to be protected. I don't have a way to buy other people into the concept of protecting my experience if their experiences aren't protected. So we create like a system of rules. Oftentimes it's called government. And what we do is we use these set of rules to enforce on each other a mutual respect or protection for other people's like asserted preferences. So the reason why I value conscious experience is because I don't want mine to be destroyed. Yes.
Yeah, obviously we're going to disagree on the fundamental role of government. I would just say, to protect people's rights. You don't think the fetus is a person, therefore it doesn't have rights, but, to protect the rights of the people. Is that fair?
I think so. They cut it a little bit, but probably.
Oh, okay. Hold on one second. Let me see if I can move. But yeah, okay. So if abortion being illegal, right, would maximize utility, you would say abortion could be illegal.
If abortion being illegal would make everybody better,
maximize utility.
Yeah, I guess so. Sure.
Okay, so I have a couple things here because I don't know how you make this like subjective value judgment for utility. So I mean, it kind of like depends. Like I guess if we had like a criminal mother and she had a child, I think most people would reasonably value the child more than the mother that's going to spend the rest of her life in jail. But how do you determine what you value and what's going to produce the most utility?
I don't get hardcore lost into what has the most utils or whatever. Basically, the way that I approach this is everybody has some asserted preferences. We ought to respect each other's preferences. Humans tend to work better in groups and together with each other, so we all kind of like have this big social contract where we work together to reciprocate each other's values and preferences, and then we build and we work things and blah, blah, blah. I don't know how far down you want to run with that, but...
So can you show me how abortion would not maximize? Abortion being illegal would.
Because if abortion is illegal, you've taken something that is a conscious agent that might state a preference that it doesn't want something living in its body, and that thing doesn't even have preferences or have a conscious experience yet. So I don't see how I can demand that person wait until that thing grows to a state where now they can't get rid of the responsibility or now they can't have an abortion, even though there was nothing that existed there before. So turning women basically into live incubators, I think, is immoral when the thing that is being incubated doesn't even have an experience yet to speak of.
Oh yeah, so again, like let's say the future consciousness of the fetus and the happiness they could endure and provide for others would outweigh the mother's happiness if they can't get an abortion.
That's like an impossible measure. Like it could grow up to be Hitler, it could grow up to be Mozart. Like there's no way to know that, right?
And the value judgment you're making is probably impossible too, because you don't know the potential of the fetus because you're not giving it the ability to, so you can't even know if it maximizes utility or not because you're cutting off that preference right there.
So the problem is that like we're kind of running around in circles, but I have no reason whatsoever to value the potentiality of something existing.
Well,
the potentiality of something existing is not that thing existing. That's not the case in literally any other thing. If we see like a bunch of bricks, we wouldn't say that's a potential building. Or if we see like a few drops of water, like, oh, that's a potential, like we don't view like potentiality like that. Like there might be a potential for something, but that's not the same thing as the thing itself. Like when a zygote forms and it follows its development, yeah, like it'll eventually develop a consciousness, but it hasn't developed a conscious experience yet. Like there's a difference between the development of a thing and having that thing versus like just like being on the way to that thing. These are two different things.
Wait. So what was the thing you said? Because I heard you say you can't know. What was that part?
Well, it's weird to say that, like, well, a baby could grow and you don't know if it's going to be positive or negative utility. Like, that's always a mystery. We don't know that ever. We don't know what babies are going to go through.
Oh, yeah. I mean, like, you can't make most, like, utility judgments, at least from your perspective in general. So I think that it would be almost strange to be able to say that we should make abortion illegal because at this present moment it produces the most utility. But the whole principle of utility is we're going to do whatever would maximize utility. So you're willing to violate bodily autonomy. You're willing to violate consciousness in order to maximize utility. Like, that's your whole ethical framework.
Yeah, I mean, depending on what we're talking about, sure.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, so you're willing to violate this principle that you hold for standard of moral consideration of consciousness in order to, adhere to your ethical framework of utilitarianism. So if it produced the most utility, which you can or cannot know, and you are willing to violate, the state of current consciousness in order to arrive to this decision, would you or would you not make abortion illegal?
Yeah, it's possible, but the problem is that I can't conceive of an area where abortion all of a sudden becomes like illegal based on what you're talking about. So when you say, oh, would you violate autonomy because you're a utilitarian? Well, sure. If you could show me, for instance, that like killing like Ellie in The Last of Us, gives people a cure to free everybody from being a zombie. Okay, sure, I can see the argument there, but that's not the same. That's not the same as arguing the potentiality of a life that doesn't even exist yet. Like these two things are wholly. Yeah.
Wait, I don't see why it's not the same, because you're willing to violate principles in order to produce the most utility. You set the standard. You set the principle of potentiality not mattering. So you'd be willing to violate that principle in order to produce the most utility.
I would be willing to violate it because it's not a quote unquote. It's not a deontological principle. But you haven't given me a single reason to violate it. That's the thing. You've given me no reason to value the potentiality of life. All you've done is reassert my moral system. I mean that like, oh, well, hold on. Would you do something if it would maximize like the outcomes of the world? Well, yeah, of course I would. That's literally my normative framework. Yeah. But like just saying that like, well, now we're going to make all abortion legal. I don't see how that possibly increases the utility everywhere. Now, every woman that's forced to deliver a child that doesn't want to is like miserable for it. Women are going to feel like their bodies are being made to be incubators.
That's exactly what I'm saying, is that your whole ethical position is literally arbitrary, because you're saying that we're assigning this value judgment at the current moment when we see that making abortion illegal, at least in your case, right, is maximizing utility. Now, you're not even allowing the other part to exist, even though you're willing to violate potentiality. That's my argument.
Yeah, there's this. You're using phrases that are meaningless. I don't know what it means to violate potentiality. Hold on. I don't think that phrase means anything.
No. Yeah. But you are willing to care about potentiality if it would maximize utility. And you can't know if it will maximize utility. So do you see how arbitrary your principles are? Okay,
so in terms of whether my stuff is arbitrary, I mean, as an anti-realist, I'll accept some level of that. But of course, I'm going to argue the same for your positions as well. I just say that you won't recognize it. Well, I would say that you're the valuing of potentiality. I don't think that makes any sense. Like, it just isn't. It doesn't make sense to value the potential of something. You value the thing itself.
I mean, again, like it goes back to human substance. From the moment of conception, there's a causal chain to make something a rational being and let it act upon its values. An abortion is killing, whether or not it's conscious, it's killing something before it can act on its values.
Can you think of, I'm just curious, in the terms of potentiality, can you think of a single other thing where this would hold? So like, for instance, the Mona Lisa painting, if I would have spilled all of the paints before you did that painting, does that count as like destroying the Mona Lisa, or like? Wait.
If you had what? What painting?
So if we take like the Mona Lisa, okay? If I would dump out all of Da Vinci's paints, okay, before he like painted the Mona Lisa, would you say that like I destroyed the Mona Lisa?
No, wait. Did he paint it or not?
No.
He didn't end up painting it.
No, but all the parts were there. He had the paints, he had the paintbrush, he had the canvas. It was going to become the Mona Lisa.
Wait, hold on. So you prevented. Wait, hold on, because I'm gonna explain how this is disanalogous with abortion, but I'll go into like my ethics first. But like this would first of all just be that you A, violated his property rights. B, it would just be that you destroyed something that was, that was being brought up into existence. So I don't see how that would.
Yeah, I totally agree. I agree with exactly what you said there. When you have an abortion, you're destroying whatever exists there, the zygote or however it's developed since then of the fetus. Yeah, but it's not a human life yet. It's not the Mona Lisa yet. There's like a process where it becomes something.
First of all, it is. It's human life. If you want to dispute this point, we can get into that. But I mean, the question is it a person? Because I mean, everybody kind of agrees that from the moment of conception, it's a life.
Sure, but what I'm saying is that that moment of consciousness is comparable to like the Mona Lisa, to where you can have all the parts for it. You can have the canvas and you can have the paints. But if I were to like tip over the paints or destroy the canvas, you wouldn't say, "Oh my God, you've killed the Mona Lisa. You've gotten rid of the Mona Lisa."
Wait, hold on. Wait, this is kind of the difference between active and passive potential again, because as you start painting the Mona Lisa, right, as the fetus is, begins into conception, being a zygote, when the egg and the sperm meet, that is active potential. That is when that brush has been picked up and you start the painting. Now, what you're describing is passive potential. So if I were to like use, for example, like birth control, that would stop an egg from being fertilized. That's
some birth control doesn't. Some birth control in your world would be considered murder, but
I mean, a birth control as in like, pre-taken to sex usually stops an egg from being able to be fertilized.
My understanding is that there's a lot of oral contraception where what it does is it allows the egg to be fertilized, but it doesn't let the egg catch, and it'll just basically be like ejected from the body. Even if it does get fertilized, it's still possible to fertise an egg. It'll just never which would be murder in your world.
So what you'd be describing is just passive potentiality.
Sure.
Right, like this artist has the passive potential to paint this painting, but once that process has started and you interrupt that, you're initiating force. That's it.
Okay, let's say that you find a sapling, I guess, and you pick it out of the ground. Is that the same as destroying a tree? If it would have grown into a tree?
Like you mean like a seed?
Like a little, and it sprouted.
Wait, yeah, I mean, yeah, like if the thing was sprouted, it was continuing to sprout, obviously it hadn't reached its maximum potential, but yeah, quite literally, it is the substance of the tree that you would be destroying.
Okay,
yeah.
When you say substance of, you realize you're kind of begging the question, right? Like, because you're defining substance. Yeah, I understand. Sure, I understand. But like I would argue that I could have a similar framework as yours, but I would just say the substance of isn't created until the conscious experience forms, right?
I mean, yeah, sure. You argued the same thing with existence, and I can do that. But again, I already went into like what I meant by a substance at the very beginning. But back to the whole tree thing. If you go from the moment that the nutrients like need water in order to form the seed, then yeah, if you prevent nutrients from forming at all, I would say that's passive, and you can do that 100%. But if you actually, once it's the seed, starts growing, that would be active potentiality, similar to a fetus. And yeah, you would be, killing per se, whatever you do with the tree if you take that out of the ground or whatever.
Why should you care about the difference between the passive and the active here?
Okay, yeah. So again, this is good because this kind of gets into like why, where do we draw the line with potentiality? Like I have the potential to go murder someone. Why can't I just be like arrested right now? Because it's an epistemic possibility. But we only value things from the moment of conception and life when it begins as a human substance. So a sperm is not a human, right? Like an egg is not a human. That's
well, sure, but we're not talking about what is a human. We're talking about what is like a person, right? You made that distinction earlier.
I mean, I would say from the moment of conception, it's a person, but you're obviously disagreeing with that. But
when does it stop? Okay, so here's an interesting question. You think that from the moment of conception, it's a person. When do you think it's no longer a person?
So let's say the fetus comes out, it's a newborn, it's a toddler, it's a teenager, it grows up, it dies, and then yeah, that would be it.
What is death though? What does that mean?
With death would be the absence of potential. From if a person was about like at T0, this person is alive, right? And they're about to die in 1 second, they still have the potential up until they do not have the potential, and then they would be considered dead.
Okay, I feel like most people would just say that death is when the conscious experience ends, but okay.
I mean, yeah, like that would also be a corollary,
Well, not a corollary. I mean, it would be like that is the moment, like you still have, it's still a human. A corpse is still a human, but it doesn't have like a
experience. Could end and then resume. So then that's why I make potential clear, is because it's not going to resume, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like we've kind of exhausted this.
Yeah. How do you get around like antinatalist arguments?
Antinatalist arguments, those kind of go into like the role of the fetus as a trespasser.
Well, no, I'm saying, like, let's say somebody says that if you're valuing the potentiality for consciousness, shouldn't you value that whether you might be subjecting it to potential harms, and therefore the creation of it is in and of itself immoral because you're subjecting something to potential harms without its consent?
Well, I mean, first of all, subjecting something to potential harms isn't the same as actually harming it. It's like, we would say it's an initiation of force to abort a zygote, for example, right?
Well, no, I'm not talking about abortion. I'm talking about like any trials or tribulations or suffering it might have. Maybe you have a child and at 4 years old it gets leukemia.
Oh, okay, like arguments like that. So then that's when it kind of gets into like rationality and force, like into a state of dependency. So like if I, get a person and I make them unconscious, I put them on my boat, and they obviously don't know they're there. And when they wake up, they'd be like subjected to whatever I want to do to them because they're on my property, and that would be kind of like bringing them into a state of like violence. But I kind of just don't see how that's relevant because the whole causal obligation.
Yeah. So the relevance is that like so once something has a conscious experience, it ought to be protected, and then you ought to do what you can to provide for it. That's my framework. So in your framework, you seem to. Hold on. So
I can tell you're not an antinatalist, right?
Well, I'm not, but I feel like if I had your framework, I feel like I would be forced to be an antinatalist. Because if you're telling me that we ought to value the potentiality of something like that, then I would say, well, okay, the moment a zygote is formed, or maybe even before that, you've got like this potentiality for life to exist. And even if we haven't gotten to the point of it existing yet, well, now I need to consider like, well, what are the moral implications of me bringing something like this into the world?
First of all, I would say that it does exist, but then also you don't like. That's why I wouldn't say even a 1-year-old, even though it may not be rational. If a 1-year-old needed these medications and you had to give it to them to survive, I would say, yeah, you would have to do so or else it would be negligence.
Sure, but that's because it already exists. But like, do you think? Here's a question: do you think it would be immoral to give birth to a child if you knew it was going to die at 4 years old from leukemia?
Do I think it would be immoral to give birth to it?
Yeah. If you knew,
this is like saying, why can't we go around killing people because they're going to die anyway?
No.
Like, no. We value active potential, not passive potential.
So if you got pregnant and at day 0, the moment you're pregnant, the moment that zygote forms, if a doctor told you this baby is going to be born, but it's going to suffer and die from leukemia at 4 years old, you would still go through with the pregnancy, or you would say somebody ought to go through the pregnancy and everything?
Again, absolutely, because under my framework, we're considering that a life. Right, and even if the full ability for that human to maximize the values is going to end at 4-year-olds, so be it. But we're not going to prevent it from doing so by initiating force before that happens. Like, let's say, like, if a 15-year-old, right, had some sort of condition and they knew they were going to die in 5 years, I wouldn't say, let's say, like, I know you're going to say they have a conscious experience, but it's the principle, like, why are we valuing something now if it's going to die later? This is the whole antinatal.
Well, no, but it's different because the 15-year-old would already have a conscious experience. They've already begun. But with the fetus, you could prevent that suffering from ever occurring by having the abortion before it even has a conscious experience. Now you've totally forgone that whole life of suffering until it dies at 4 years old from leukemia. You just avoid it completely, not by killing anything, but by preventing the conscious experience from even taking form.
First of all, I would say it would be killing. Like, I assume under my framework that would be killing.
Would you?
Right?
Okay, so I understand you're saying killing, but would you at least agree that there's no suffering there?
Wait, in killing something?
Yeah.
First of all, even if the 4-year-old did have leukemia, it can't make the rational decision to kill itself. But I think you and I can agree on that. I'm fine with people choosing to kill themselves. I just don't think a 4-year-old should be able to do so. Now, same thing with the fetus. It's not rational at that moment, right? It's developing into its rationality, so.
Sure, but I'm asking you, if you have an abortion, or if you kill something that is day 0, the zygote is formed, is there any suffering there?
Wait, can you repeat that?
Is there any suffering that happens by aborting a fetus that does not yet have a conscious experience?
Wait, my standard wouldn't be suffering.
Yeah, but I know you're not saying that. I'm just asking if there is suffering there.
I mean, suffering, like, it's kind of subjective. Like, the mother could feel traumatic suffering.
No, I'm not talking about the mother. I'm talking about on behalf of the fetus. Is there suffering there when you abort something before it has a conscious experience?
I mean, as in it feels pain?
Sure, whatever you think suffering is.
No, it doesn't feel pain.
Okay,
No,
so
similarly
why
like
would
a
you say?
person in a
Yeah.
coma, no,
So why is
there's
it?
no-
So why is it that you
there's
would
no
have
suffering.
something that it hasn't even been able to form an experience yet, and you know it's going to have a great deal of suffering if it grows up and has leukemia before and dies? If you could do something that would prevent that from happening, that would avoid all suffering whatsoever.
Right. Again, I'm going to outline this here, right? Past sentience, when talking about suffering here, is going to be irrelevant, right? Because let's say, at T0, this person is in a coma, they're under general anesthesia. Under this framework, we would be morally permissible to kill them, right? And the reason past consciousness doesn't matter is the principle that we're outlining here is just antinatalism in general. So what this means is that do we ought to grant moral consideration to something that that can't feel suffering? Like, that's the principle, right? So regardless of past sentience, if it can't feel suffering in that moment, I would say no. Like, that doesn't make it morally permissible to kill it because of all these reductios it's susceptible to.
Yeah, I understand the reductios, but all of these are things we've already addressed. Like with the coma thing, like this is a person, if they come out of their coma, they could immediately kill themselves if they want to. Like they can assert that if they want to.
Hold on. The principle we're outlining here is just suffering, right? We're not even getting into personhood.
Sure. I only asked that at the beginning because I was just curious if you value or care about avoiding suffering whatsoever. But it sounds like suffering to you is not relevant to any part of this equation.
No, like, I mean, I could, kill someone in their sleep and there'd be no suffering, per se, depending on how you do it. But yeah, I mean, this just isn't a principle that makes sense.
So then, let's say that there is a mother who's pregnant, and let's say that there's a 90% chance that she dies during childbirth, but there's a 100% chance that the baby will live every single time. Do you think that the mother should always be forced to give birth, even knowing that she's going to die 9 times out of 10?
Yeah, if it's not like completely, if you said 10 out of 10, I would say no. But then 9 out of 10, yeah, I would say she would have to give birth if the fetus. I mean, if you said the fetus was gonna live. So.
Okay. Yeah, that's a world that my normative system would reject those worlds wholesale because it would be, I think, a pretty horrible place.
But like again, I feel like we've exhausted this. But it was a good conversation for sure.
Okay. All right. Well, do you want to give a final plug your stuff or?
Well, yeah. I mean, you can follow me on TikTok. It's Saanvi.Reasoning. I don't really do abortion that much, but I might get back on it. But yeah, it was a good conversation. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for the conversation. Bye. Why are you against abortion in the second trimester? Does the prefrontal cortex develop? My understanding is that right now the thought is that it's like 24 to 25 weeks is about when we think like the brain parts are necessary for conscious experience. Yeah. Can you steelman your own abortion argument from years ago? It's actually kind of similar to hers, I think. That like the most consistent definition for the start of life is when the zygote forms, and then yeah, anything related to consciousness is relatively arbitrary. I don't know if I've just done too many drugs now or whatever, but the conscious experience part just feels more important to me now than it used to. I don't know what an argument between me and me 3 years ago would look like, but even 3 years ago I would have said like I'm 49-51, in favor of pro-life. Like even back then it was like really tenuous. So it's not like I don't know if any time in me on the internet, maybe 10 years ago I would have been more firm, but like over the past like 5 years I've always been like, oh, I'm in the middle. Like I feel like it's really hard. Yeah. You used to say you didn't want a rule that would have made it so you could have been killed. Yeah, that is an argument I use, but I think I would fight that. Saying that like I want to create a rule that would have prevented me from not existing doesn't really make sense because I can't assert like there might be millions of voices crying out right now against me that don't exist yet. Like I think I would attack the rationality of that statement. Like you can't assert a preference that you don't exist to assert. So like yeah. Because technically in my head, I actually thought about this privately. And I didn't have a good answer for it. I don't know if I ever brought this up on stream because I don't always like to give people slam dunk arguments against me. But one of my arguments used to be I wouldn't want abortion to be legal because I extend similar protection to people. If I would have been aborted, I would have never existed. So therefore, right, I would protect the life of a fetus. You can technically run that line back though to a pretty arbitrary level. Like I would never want contraception to exist because if my mom would have used contraception, that egg wouldn't have been fertilized and now I wouldn't exist, right? You could technically run that back to an arbitrary level. And I don't know, to where like you could use that argument to say we should maximally be producing as many babies as possible constantly. Yeah. Okay, love you guys. Peace out. Bye. Remember to hit that like and subscribe, and don't forget the notification bell so that my videos show up right in your feed.
SCVs just glitched like crazy. He's like, I guess I win now.